The gate slammed shut behind her. 4 military working dogs, 90 pounds each, starving, conditioned to kill, spread across the concrete pen like a net tightening around prey. Lieutenant Colonel Dominic Kessler pressed his face against the chain-link fence and gave the only order he'd issued all afternoon. "Let her prove it." The lead dog lunged. Lieutenant Kira Brennan, 27 years old, no weapon, no armor, no backup, stood exactly where she was. Then she did the one thing no one in that training yard expected. She knelt down, opened her hands, and let her heart rate drop like a stone into still water. The dog stopped mid-stride, sat, and everything that Dominic Kessler had believed for 33 years began to crack apart. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we show you how a 27-year-old naval officer took control of 4 attack dogs with nothing but knowledge and a lifetime of preparing for this exact moment, you need to understand what brought her to that concrete pen. You need to know about the father she never met, the mentor who carried 40 years of guilt, and the man who'd spent 3 decades turning grief into doctrine. This is a story about legacy, the kind you inherit, the kind you build, and the kind you dismantle with your bare hands when it's killing the innocent. Let's go back, 33 years back, to the day Kira Brennan's life began and ended before she ever drew breath. February 27th, 1991. Kuwait Theater, 7 kilometers outside Kuwait City. The sand was the color of old bone, and the air tasted like burning oil from the wells Saddam's forces had torched on their retreat north. Captain Thaddeus Brennan, 28 years old, moved through the rubble of what used to be a Republican Guard bunker complex with his K9 partner at his side. The German shepherd's name was Havoc, and right now, Havoc was showing every tooth in his head. Not at the enemy, at Brennan. "Easy, boy." Brennan's voice was steady, but his hand had moved to his sidearm. 3rd time today, Havoc had shown aggression toward him instead of the objective. 3rd time in a week, the dog had redirected what was supposed to be controlled intensity into something that looked a lot like rage with nowhere to go. Staff Sergeant Mike Hollis, positioned 10 meters back, saw it happening, keyed his radio. "Captain, we need to pull back. That dog's not right." "Negative, we clear this sector, then we reassess." Havoc's growl dropped into a register that made Hollis's spine go cold. The dog's training, months of correction, escalation, punishment designed to build what the trainers called operational hardness, had built something all right. It had built a weapon that couldn't tell the difference between enemy and handler anymore. Brennan took one more step forward. Havoc attacked. What happened next took 11 seconds. The dog hit Brennan at the throat. Brennan went down hard. Hollis fired twice. Both rounds hit Havoc, dropped him instantly. But by then, Captain Thaddeus Brennan was bleeding out on sand that wouldn't remember him 6 hours from now. Hollis reached him in time to hear Brennan's last words. Not a prayer, not a goodbye to the wife he'd left 7 months pregnant back at Camp Pendleton. Just 4 words that would haunt Hollis for the rest of his life. It wasn't his fault. Meaning the dog. Meaning something in the training had broken what should have been unbreakable. Meaning a 28-year-old handler died knowing the animal that killed him had been failed by every single person who'd touched him before deployment. The incident report filed 3 weeks later said, "Combat stress-induced aggression, unavoidable casualty." The investigation closed without finding fault. Havoc was listed as euthanized in the field per standard protocol. Captain Brennan got a funeral with full military honors and a folded flag presented to a widow who was 8 months pregnant and knew exactly one thing for certain. Her husband had died for nothing. The baby was born 6 weeks later. March 14th, 1991. They named her Kira, which means light in some languages and leader in others. Her mother chose it because she needed to believe something good could come out of the darkness that had swallowed the man she'd married. Kira Brennan grew up looking at a photograph of a father she'd never meet. Grew up hearing the sanitized version of how he died serving his country. Grew up knowing in her bones that the official story was a lie, wrapped around a failure nobody wanted to name. By the time she was 14, she'd found the real incident report. Not the public one, the classified after-action review that her mother had received years later, the one that had words like handler error and insufficient canine behavioral management buried in paragraph 17, where nobody would notice unless they were looking for blood. Kira looked for blood, found it, and made a decision that would shape the next 13 years of her life. If broken training had killed her father, she'd learn to fix what broke, and she'd make damn sure it never happened again. Present day, 2024, 33 years and 5 months after Captain Brennan died on foreign sand. The Naval Special Warfare Command building in San Diego was all concrete and glass and fluorescent lighting harsh enough to make everyone look either dead or decisive. Kira sat in a conference room on the 3rd floor, wearing her service-dress blues, waiting for Commander Diana Frost to finish reading the file she'd already memorized. Frost was late 40s, steel gray hair cut close, eyes that cataloged everything in the first 3 seconds and forgot nothing after. She'd been running K9-related investigations for NCIS for 6 years. Kira had worked with her twice before, once in Bahrain, once in the Horn of Africa, and trusted her about as far as you could trust anyone whose job was finding things people desperately wanted to stay hidden. Frost closed the file, looked up. Camp Harrison, North Carolina, 50 kilometers outside Fort Bragg, K9 training facility, primarily for special operations deployment. 11 formal complaints filed in the last 18 months, 4 preventable K9 deaths in the same period, and a program director who's been in command for 12 years running the same protocols he learned in Desert Storm. Kira kept her face neutral. That's what the file says. The file also says Lieutenant Colonel Dominic Kessler has a spotless record. 2 combat deployments, 3 commendations, 0 disciplinary actions. The handlers who filed complaints, 3 retracted. 4 went anonymous. The rest got buried at the regional command level before they ever reached my desk. So why are we talking about it now? Frost pulled out a second folder, thinner, the kind of thin that meant somebody had stripped out everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Because a veterinarian named Marcus Reed has been building a case for 8 months, documenting every medical flag that got overruled, every recommendation that got ignored, every dog that went from rehab capable to dead in the time it took Kessler to sign a form. She slid the folder across the table. Kira opened it. The first photo was a German Shepherd. 3 years old, tan and black coat, dark eyes that looked directly into the camera with exhaustion that comes from pain you can't escape. Right shoulder visibly lower than the left. Medical notation in the margin. Stress fractures, untreated. Electrical burns, repeated exposure. Behavioral assessment, salvageable with intervention. The dog's name was printed at the top of the page in neat block letters. Havoc. Kira's hand stopped moving, just for a second. Just long enough that Frost noticed. You recognize the name. My father's K9, same name. Kira's voice came out level because she'd spent 13 years learning how to keep things level when they wanted to shake apart. Coincidence. Kessler named him. According to the intake logs, he specifically requested that designation. Called it honoring a famous Gulf War military working dog. Frost paused. Your father's dog isn't famous. The incident was classified. So either Kessler knew your father personally, or he knew the story and decided the name was worth remembering. Kira closed the folder, met Frost's eyes. What do you need from me? I need you to go in undercover. DOD compliance auditor on paper, federal investigator in practice. I need you to document everything Reed's been documenting, but with legal authority to act on it. And I need you to get Kessler to show you what he really believes, not what he puts in official reports. You're asking me to investigate a man who might have known my father. I'm asking you to investigate a program that's killed 4 dogs in 18 months using methods that killed your father 33 years ago. If Kessler's connection to Captain Brennan is personal, that's something we'll deal with when it surfaces. Right now, I need to know if Camp Harrison is salvageable or if we're shutting it down and court-martialing everyone who touched it. Kira looked at the folder again. At the photo of a German shepherd named after the dog that had killed the only father she'd ever know. At the medical notations that read like a chronicle of systematic torture dressed up as training. I'll need support, someone who understands the old methods well enough to recognize them, and the new methods well enough to prove they work better. Frost's eyebrow went up a quarter inch. You have someone in mind? Colonel Garrett Aldridge, retired. He wrote half the modern K9 welfare protocols DoD uses, or claims to use. Aldridge is 73. He's been retired for 15 years. He's also the man who trained the generation of handlers that trained Kessler. If we're going to dismantle Kessler's ideology, we need someone who understands where it came from. Someone who can speak the language and prove it's killing what it's supposed to protect. Frost considered this, nodded once. Make the ask. If he agrees, you have full investigative authority. If he doesn't, you go in alone, and we hope you don't end up like the last 3 auditors who tried to question Kessler's program. What happened to them? One quit after 2 days. One filed a report that went nowhere and requested transfer. The third, Frost's mouth tightened. The third filed a report, got reassigned to a desk job in Alaska, and stopped answering questions about what she saw at Camp Harrison. Kira stood, extended her hand. Frost shook it. When do I leave? Soon as Aldridge says yes, or soon as you decide you're going without him. Kira already knew which one it would be. She'd been preparing for this mission since she was 14 years old, reading classified files in her mother's study, while the woman who'd raised her alone pretended not to notice. She'd go to Montana. She'd ask an old man who'd spent 40 years carrying guilt to carry it one more time into the fight that mattered. And then she'd drive to North Carolina and finish what her father's death had started. Garrett Aldridge lived on 200 acres of Montana backcountry that looked like God had gotten tired of making things complicated and decided to try simplicity for a while. Pine trees, open meadow, a creek that ran clear and cold year-round, and a log cabin that had been standing since the 1970s and intended to keep standing until the land reclaimed it. Kira's rental truck came up the gravel drive just after dawn, which was the only time Aldridge accepted visitors, if he accepted them at all. She'd called ahead, left a message, got no response. Came anyway because some conversations you couldn't have over the phone. Aldridge was on the porch when she pulled up, 73 years old, lean in the way that comes from a lifetime of physical work and a refusal to quit moving. Silver hair cut military short, and eyes that had seen enough that very little surprised them anymore. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and a German shepherd at his feet. The dog watched Kira get out of the truck with the calm assessment of an animal that had been trained right and never forgotten what that felt like. You're Captain Brennan's daughter, not a question. Aldridge's voice had the gravel of age in it, but the certainty was steel. I saw your mother at the funeral. You weren't born yet, but I saw the way she carried herself. You carry the same. Kira stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. You knew my father? Met him once. K9 Handler Conference, Fort Benning, October 1990. He asked me about transitioning to modern methods. I told him. Aldridge stopped, looked out at the meadow. I told him the old ways worked. I told him soft training got handlers killed. I told him to stay hard on his dogs because that's what I believed. 4 months later, he was dead. Heavy silence followed. Kira let it sit. I'm not here to blame you for what you didn't know, she said. I'm here because Commander Frost sent me to investigate a program that's using the same methods that killed my father. And I need someone who understands those methods well enough to help me prove they're wrong. Aldridge finally looked at her. You want me to come out of retirement to help you destroy a program I helped build? I want you to come out of retirement to help me save the dogs the program is destroying. He considered this, gestured to the porch. Come up, have coffee. Tell me what you're really asking. Kira climbed the steps, accepted the mug he poured from a thermos. The coffee was black and strong enough to wake the dead. They sat in silence that happens between people who both understand that some things take time to say. Finally, Aldridge spoke. Cold War Germany, 1975 to 85. I ran K9 operations on the East German border. Our job was to detect infiltrators, stop border crossings, maintain the line between what we called freedom and what they called oppression. The dogs we used were trained hard. Shock collars, food deprivation, isolation protocols, everything designed to build what we called operational edge. We thought we were making them stronger. He paused, drank his coffee. In 10 years, I lost 12 dogs, not to combat, to stress-induced illness, behavioral breakdowns, and one who redirected aggression so badly he had to be put down before he killed his handler. Every time it happened, I told myself it was the cost of maintaining standards, that the dogs who survived were better for it, that the handlers who made it through were safer because their animals were hard. The German shepherd at his feet shifted position. Aldridge reached down, scratched behind the dog's ears with the unconscious affection of a man who'd finally learned what loyalty actually looked like. 1985, I watched a dog named Duke die from a stress-induced heart attack at 4 years old. He'd been trained exactly the way I trained hundreds of others. And I realized I'd spent 10 years building something that was killing what I was supposed to protect. So I changed. Took me another 5 years to fully understand what I'd been doing wrong. Took another 20 to write the protocols that were supposed to fix it. He looked at Kira directly. And now you're telling me someone's still using my old methods? The ones that killed Duke and 11 others. The ones I thought I'd buried. Lieutenant Colonel Dominic Kessler, Camp Harrison, North Carolina, 12 years as program director, 4 preventable K9 deaths in the last 18 months, 8 dogs euthanized for behavioral issues that were rehabilitation capable, and a regional commander named Nathan Pierce who's been authorizing the same protocols across 6 facilities. Aldridge's jaw tightened. Pierce, I know that name. He attended my lectures at Fort Benning in the early 90s, took notes, asked questions about maintaining combat edge. I thought he was interested in the reforms. Turns out he was interested in the old methods. He's been calling it Operation Hard Standard. Internal memo says modern warfare demands hard dogs. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. Kira pulled out her phone, showed him the document Frost had forwarded. That's your language, Colonel, from the lectures you gave before you reformed. Aldridge read it. His hands shook slightly. Not from age, from something closer to rage. How many dogs? 47, across 6 facilities, 3 years. He closed his eyes, opened them. And you want me to help you stop it. I want you to help me prove the new methods work better. Because Kessler's a true believer. He's not corrupt, he's convinced. And the only way to break conviction is to show him reality until he can't deny it anymore. Aldridge stood, walked to the edge of the porch, looked out at the land he'd bought with the pension from a career that had included too many mistakes and not enough time to fix them all. If I come with you, he said slowly, I'm not coming as a mentor. I'm coming as someone who needs to fix what I broke before I die. I'm 73. I've got maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky. I don't want to spend them knowing I could have stopped this and didn't. Kira stood beside him. Then pack a bag, Colonel. We leave in 2 hours. He turned, extended his hand. She took it. Call me Garrett, he said. We're about to walk into a fight together. Rank doesn't mean much when you're both on the same side of the line. Kira shook his hand, felt the strength still in it, the steadiness of someone who'd spent decades learning how to carry weight without letting it break him. Kira, she said, and Garrett, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we see if we can actually win this thing. They drove south 12 hours later, Garrett in the passenger seat, his German shepherd, a rescue named Bishop, in the back. The dog had been a washout from another program, failed for being too soft by a trainer who'd mistaken gentleness for weakness. Garrett had taken him, rebuilt him, proved that soft didn't mean broken. Bishop was the proof of concept. Now they just had to convince a man who'd spent 33 years believing the opposite. The question was whether Dominic Kessler could be convinced, or whether they were about to meet a true believer who'd rather burn the program down than admit he'd been wrong. Kira had a feeling they were about to find out. The checkpoint guard at Camp Harrison's outer gate didn't look up when Kira's truck rolled to a stop. She handed him her credentials through the window gap. DOD Animal Welfare Compliance Inspector, authorized for facility review, duration 5 days. He squinted at the badge, at her, at Garrett in the passenger seat. They expecting you? Program Director Kessler requested the review. I'm early. The guard's jaw worked like he had something to say and thought better of it. He waved them through. Kira drove past without another word. In the rearview mirror, she watched him pick up a phone, making a call, probably to Kessler, probably saying something about the auditor arriving with an old man who looked military but wasn't on the manifest. Good. Let Kessler wonder. Let him start this meeting off balance. Camp Harrison's K9 facility sat at the northern edge of the base, separated from everything else by half a mile of pine trees and red clay. Deliberate isolation. Programs that operated outside the spotlight were programs where accountability got soft and tradition became an excuse for things that would make a prosecutor's career. She killed the engine, sat for a moment. The compound was quiet except for one sound that made her stomach tighten. Not barking, not the sharp, alert sounds of working dogs running drills. This was something lower, desperate, the sound of animals pushed past their limit and kept there on purpose. One yelp cut through the morning air, high and sudden. Then laughter followed it. Male voices, easy laughter that said the pain wasn't a problem, it was the point. Garrett's hand tightened on the door handle. I know that sound. Heard it too many times in Germany. Means we're already too late for some of them. Then we make sure we're not too late for the rest. They got out. The admin building door opened before they reached it. Lieutenant Colonel Dominic Kessler stepped into the sunlight, and Kira understood immediately why this was going to be harder than Frost thought. The man standing in front of her wasn't a sadist, wasn't someone who enjoyed suffering. He was something more dangerous. He was someone who believed. 54 years old, West Point class of '88, shoulders squared like he was still standing at attention 30 years later, bearing that came from 2 combat deployments, and a certainty that the methods that had kept him alive were the methods that would keep everyone else alive too. He looked at Kira the way career officers looked at civilians who thought they understood military operations. Measuring, dismissing. Then he looked at Garrett and something shifted. You're military, Kessler said. Not a question, recognition in his voice, the way veterans could spot each other across a crowded room. Where'd you serve? Cold War Germany, East-West Border Operations, K9 Division. Kessler's eyes narrowed. You ran the border patrols? For 10 years, 75 to 85. Then you know what it takes. You know why standards matter. Kessler's voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally found an ally. These compliance reviews, they don't understand operational reality. They want us to train therapy dogs when what we need are combat multipliers. Garrett's voice stayed level, gave nothing away. I know what I used to believe. I'm here to see what you believe now. Kessler studied him for another moment, then turned to Kira. And you are? Kira Brennan, DOD Compliance Inspector. I'm here for the scheduled facility review. Nobody told me they were sending a woman. Kira kept her face neutral. Nobody told me that would be relevant. Something flickered across Kessler's face. Not quite a smile. 3rd compliance review this year. The other 2 were gone in 3 days. I guess we'll find out if you're the 3rd one or something different. I guess we will. He gestured toward the kennel complex. I'll give you the tour, show you what a real working K9 program looks like. Not the kind they teach in classrooms, the kind that keeps handlers alive in theater. They walked. Kira kept 3 paces behind, watching the way Kessler moved through the compound like every inch of it belonged to him. Men like him built kingdoms in forgotten corners. They counted on no one looking closely enough to see what the kingdom was built on. She was looking, and what she saw made her hands want to curl into fists. The kennel building hit her with the smell first. Disinfectant fighting a losing battle against the reality of 40 dogs in close quarters. But underneath that, something else. Something sour. Fear had a smell when it had been living somewhere long enough. Kessler walked her past the runs, talking without slowing down. 22 dogs deployed right now. Iraq, Bahrain, 3 in Kuwait. 18 more in various training stages. We maintain the lowest washout rate in SOCOM, under 8%. How do you keep it that low? Kira asked, already knowing the answer. High standards on the front end. We don't accept soft animals, and we don't produce them either. They passed a run where a young Belgian Malinois paced tight circles. Tongue out, ribs visible through his coat. A yellow tag hung on the gate. ISO 3. Kira stopped. That dog's water bowl is empty. Kessler glanced back without stopping. He's in isolation protocol, day 3. What did he do? Redirected aggression toward a handler during a training evolution. He's learning consequences. By being deprived of water? By learning that behavior has outcomes. Kessler kept walking. That's how you build drive, Miss Brennan. You create pressure. The dogs that can handle it become assets. The ones that can't wash out before they get someone killed. They passed more runs, more yellow tags. ISO 2, ISO 5, one marked ISO 7. 7 days without proper food or socialization. 7 days of what Kessler called learning and what Kira recognized as systematic abuse. She made mental notes, counted, documented in her head because pulling out her phone right now would shut Kessler down before she'd seen enough. Garrett walked beside her, silent, but she could feel the tension coming off him in waves. This was his nightmare made real. The methods he'd spent 40 years trying to bury, alive and thriving in a program that was supposed to have evolved past them. They reached the end of the kennel row. Kessler stopped, turned to face them both. You want the honest answer or the official one? He asked. Honest, Kira said. Dogs are pack animals. They need hierarchy. If the handler isn't dominant, the dog will be. Out there in theater, hesitation gets people killed. We don't produce hesitant dogs. We produce animals that understand consequences and respond to command without question. He paused. You may not like the methods, but you can't argue with the results. I can argue with 47 dead dogs across 6 facilities in 3 years, Kira said quietly. All of them euthanized for behavioral issues that modern protocols prove are rehabilitation capable. Kessler's face went still. Where did you get that number? Same place I got access to Operation Hard Standard internal memos. Same place I got medical documentation showing that dogs flagged as salvageable were put down anyway. Same place I got recordings of handlers filing complaints that disappeared at the regional command level. The air in the kennel corridor changed, became something sharper. You're not just a compliance inspector. No, Kira said, I'm not. She pulled out her real credentials: Naval Special Warfare Command, Federal Investigator, service number and clearance level that made Kessler's jaw tighten. Lieutenant Kira Brennan, I've been authorized by NCIS since Tuesday. Every file you've touched, every email you've sent, every decision you've made for the last 6 days, I have copies. Commander Diana Frost has copies. And now you're going to show me what you really believe, not what you put in reports. Kessler's hands were shaking, not from fear, from something closer to rage at being deceived. Who the hell do you think you are? I'm the daughter of Captain Thaddeus Brennan. He died in Kuwait in 1991 when his K9 partner, a dog named Havoc, trained with your methods, redirected aggression and killed him. I never met my father, but I've spent 27 years making sure what killed him doesn't kill anyone else. She took one step closer. And I just found out you named a dog in your program Havoc, the dog in Run 9, the German shepherd with the injured shoulder you're about to euthanize for behavioral unsuitability. You named him after the dog that killed my father. So I'll ask you directly, Colonel, did you know my father, or did you just think the name was worth remembering? The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere in the complex a door opened. Footsteps approached. A young woman in BDS appeared around the corner. Corporal stripes, dark hair pulled tight, moving fast. Sir, sorry to interrupt. We have a situation with Havoc in Run 9. Shoulder wound is infected. Doctor, Reed says if we don't treat it today, handle it, Maddox. Sir, the wound is getting worse. He needs medical attention. I said handle it. Kessler's voice went flat. Final. Do I need to explain what handle it means? Corporal Bryn Maddox's face went carefully blank. No, sir. She disappeared back around the corner. Kira watched her go, saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she'd looked at Kessler and immediately away. That wasn't discipline. That was fear. Kira turned back to Kessler. I want to see Run 9. That's not now, Colonel. Or I call Commander Frost right now and we shut this facility down before lunch. Kessler stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked without another word. They found Havoc in the back corner of Run 9. German shepherd, 3 years old, tan and black coat, right shoulder wrapped in bandaging that had started to seep. He wasn't moving, just lying there with his eyes tracking every movement in the yard, like he was waiting for the next thing that was going to hurt him. Kira stopped at the chain link, felt something go cold in her chest. This was the dog Kessler had named after her father's killer. This was the animal he'd marked for death because it had learned to associate pain with people and responded the only way traumatized animals knew how. And looking at those dark, exhausted eyes, Kira saw exactly what her father's dog must have looked like in the days before Kuwait, before the training broke what should have been unbreakable. When were you planning to put him down? She asked. Her voice came out steady because she'd learned how to keep steady when things wanted to break. End of week. Can't deploy an animal that's shown handler-directed aggression, liability risk. Or you could rehabilitate him, like the protocols require. Protocols written by people who've never sent a dog into combat. Kessler's voice carried absolute conviction. I won't risk a handler's life on an animal that's already demonstrated failure under pressure. Garrett spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. His voice was quiet, measured, and absolutely certain. Dominic Kessler, you served Desert Storm, Infantry, 2nd Battalion, February 91, Kuwait Theater. Kessler turned. How did you know that? Because I know what that war did to the handlers who survived it. I know what it did to the ones who watched their dogs fail. And I know what it did to the ones who spent the next 30 years trying to make sure it never happened again by training the failure out before deployment. Garrett stepped closer to the fence, looked at Havoc. But here's what you don't know. The methods you're using, I invented them. 75 to 85, East German border. I train dogs exactly the way you're training them now. High pressure, hard correction, isolation protocols. Everything designed to build what we called operational edge. He paused. And in 10 years, I killed 12 dogs. Not in combat, in training. Because I was so convinced that hardness equaled effectiveness that I couldn't see I was breaking what I was trying to build. Kessler's face had gone pale. You want to know why I'm here? I'm here because Lieutenant Brennan asked me to help her prove that the methods I spent 40 years trying to bury are still killing dogs in programs like yours. And I said yes because I'm 73 years old and I don't have time to be polite about this anymore. He locked eyes with Kessler. You're not a monster, son. You're just wrong. And I'm here to prove it before you kill another dog that could have been saved. The moment hung there, crystallized. Three people standing in a kennel complex in North Carolina, carrying the weight of wars fought decades apart and methods that had survived longer than they should have. Kessler broke the silence. You want to prove I'm wrong? Fine. 1,600 hours, South Training Yard. I run a handler certification exercise every Friday. It's called the Gauntlet. 4 high-drive dogs. No protective equipment. Handler establishes control through presence alone. It's been part of this program for 10 years. 0 failures. He looked at Kira. You think your father died because his dog was trained wrong? Prove it. Get in that pen. Establish control. Show me soft methods work when the pressure's real. And if I can't, then you admit I'm right. Hard training saves lives. And you walk away from this facility with your report filed under no violations found. Kira met his eyes. And if I can, then I'll give you everything, every file, every decision, every complaint that got buried. And I'll testify that Operation Hard Standard needs to be dismantled. He extended his hand. Deal? Kira looked at Garrett. The old colonel gave the smallest shake of his head. Warning, this was a trap. Kessler wouldn't offer the deal unless he was certain she'd fail. But Kira hadn't come to Camp Harrison to play it safe. She'd come to finish what her father's death had started. She took Kessler's hand, shook it. 1,600 hours, she said. South Training Yard. I'll be there. Kessler smiled. It wasn't a good smile. So will I, Lieutenant. So will I. He walked away, left Kira and Garrett standing at Run 9, looking at a dog named Havoc, who had no idea his life was about to become a proving ground for 33 years of unresolved questions. Garrett spoke quietly. You've done this before. Bahrain. I read the reports. But Kira, 4 dogs at once, hunger motivated, conditioned for aggression? That's not a test. That's an execution. Then I better make sure I don't fail. Kira checked her watch. 11:47. 4 hours and 13 minutes until 1600. I need to see the dogs he's planning to use. I need to know what I'm walking into. And I need to teach you something I should have taught 50 years ago. Garrett's voice carried the weight of every mistake he'd ever made and every lesson he'd learned from them. How to speak a language that predates training. How to communicate with animals that have forgotten what trust feels like. They had 4 hours. It would have to be enough. Because at 1,600 hours, in a concrete pen with 4 attack dogs and no way out, Kira Brennan was either going to prove that her father had died for a failure that could be fixed, or she was going to die the same way he had. There was no third option. The clock was ticking. 1,600 hours came faster than physics should have allowed. Kira spent the 4 hours in between learning everything Garrett Aldridge had spent 40 years figuring out about the difference between controlling an animal and communicating with one. They worked in a storage shed behind the admin building, out of sight, Garrett talking in that low, measured voice that turned complicated neuroscience into something you could hold in your hands. The military teaches dominance, he said. Alpha theory. Make yourself bigger, louder, more threatening than the dog. Force submission through superior presence. He shook his head. That works until it doesn't. Until the dog's fear overrides its training and you get what happened to your father. So what's the alternative? You don't make yourself dominant, you make yourself safe. Garrett pulled out a notebook, started sketching. K9 threat assessment operates on a hierarchy. First, they evaluate if you're prey. Second, if you're predator. Third, if you're pack. Military training keeps dogs locked in predator-prey dynamics. Fear-based obedience. But if you can shift the dynamic to pack recognition, you access something older, something that doesn't break under pressure. He showed her the sketch, a diagram of K9 body language. Ear positions, tail angles, weight distribution, pupil dilation. You need to read them faster than they read you. Assess threat level, stress markers, behavioral intent, all in the first 30 seconds. Then you respond not with dominance, but with signals that say, I'm not the threat you think I am. Kira studied the diagram, memorized it. And the kneeling, the exposed neck, vulnerability as communication. Every predator knows prey runs or fights, but pack members, they show trust. You kneel, you're saying, I'm not here to dominate or be dominated. I'm here to coexist. It short-circuits the aggression response if you do it right. And if I do it wrong, Garrett met her eyes. Then you prove Kessler right, and I lose another person to methods I should have killed 50 years ago. They worked until 15:45, 15 minutes before the demonstration. Garrett walked her through breathing techniques. Box breathing, 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Designed to drop heart rate and suppress cortisol production. Techniques developed by special forces for stress inoculation, now being repurposed to make a human being read as non-threatening to animals conditioned to kill. Your physiological state determines your chemical signature, Garrett explained. Adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. Dogs smell all of it. You walk in there with a fear response active, they read you as prey. You need to achieve what we call parasympathetic dominance. Calm body, calm scent, calm presence. Kira practiced, felt her heart rate drop from 94 beats per minute down to 68, down to 56. Felt the adrenaline surge flatten out into something cooler, steadier. How do you feel? Garrett asked. Like I'm about to walk into a cage with 4 dogs that want to kill me. Good, that's honest. Now take that honesty and put it somewhere it won't get you killed. When you're in that pen, there's no room for doubt. Doubt reads as weakness. Weakness triggers predation response. You need to be certain, even if you're not. Kira looked at him. This man who'd spent 40 years carrying the weight of 12 dead dogs and hundreds of handlers he trained wrong. Who'd reformed, rebuilt, written the protocols that were supposed to fix everything, and now had to watch those protocols get ignored by the people who needed them most. Garrett, she said, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then I'll make sure Kessler doesn't bury what happened. I'll make sure the investigation continues. And I'll make sure your father's name and yours end up on the legislation that forces the change. His voice was steady, certain. But it's not going to go wrong, Kira. You know why? Why? Because you're not doing this alone. Every handler who's tried this before was operating on ego and dominance theory. You're operating on science and 40 years of hard-won wisdom. That's the difference between proving a point and staying alive. 15:58. They walked to the south training yard. The concrete pen was exactly as advertised. 25 feet by 25 feet. Chain link fence on all sides, 8 feet high, topped with razor wire that said this wasn't designed for dogs to escape. No cover, no obstacles, nothing but flat concrete and 4 animals about to be released into an enclosed space with a human being they'd been conditioned to see as a threat. Kessler was waiting. So was Staff Sergeant Kyle Morrison, suited up in protective gear that covered him from neck to ankles. 2 other handlers stood off to the side, holding heavy leads attached to 4 dogs that looked like they hadn't eaten in days. The first was a Belgian Malinois, huge, tan muscle bunched tight under his coat, eyes too bright with intensity that came from hunger and misdirected drive. The tag on his collar read, ISO 7, 7 days in isolation. The second was older, scarred muzzle, moving low to the ground like he'd learned the hard way that making yourself small sometimes kept you alive longer. His eyes tracked everything with the paranoid vigilance of an animal that had stopped trusting humans to do anything but hurt. The third was young, barely 2 years old, shaking with energy that had nowhere to go. Yellow tags still clipped to his collar, nervous aggression that made him the most unpredictable of the 4. The fourth was Havoc. The German shepherd moved with a visible limp, right shoulder wrapped where Corporal Maddox had managed to get medical attention to him, despite Kessler's orders. He was scanning the yard in all directions at once, not out of aggression but pure survival instinct. When his eyes landed on Kira, they stayed there just a second longer than they stayed on anyone else. Recognition, or something close to it. Kessler saw her approaching and straightened. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered. Handlers from other units. Corporal Maddox standing off to the side with both hands pressed over her mouth. Dr. Marcus Reed, the veterinarian who'd been documenting Kessler's overrides, watching with the grim expression of someone who knew exactly how bad this could go. Lieutenant Brennan, Kessler's voice carried across the yard. Last chance to reconsider. This isn't a classroom exercise. These dogs are conditioned for aggression. You walk in there without protective equipment, without tools. You're relying entirely on presence. And presence only works if the dogs recognize it as superior to their drive. I understand the stakes, Kira said. Do you? Kessler gestured to Morrison. Staff Sergeant Morrison has 5 years handling experience, 2 combat deployments. He's certified on the Gauntlet Protocol, and right now he's geared up because even with his experience, 4 dogs at once is dangerous. Morrison's face said he didn't want to be part of this demonstration. Said he'd seen what happened when the Gauntlet went wrong. Said Kessler was making an example out of him the same way he made examples out of dogs that questioned his methods. Kira understood. This wasn't just about testing her. This was about reinforcing Kessler's authority, showing every handler watching that questioning the program meant getting thrown to the wolves, literally. I'll do it, Kira said. Put me in there. Garrett stepped forward. Dominic, this is insane. 4 dogs, hunger motivated, no protective equipment. You're not testing her competence. You're trying to get her killed. Kessler turned to him. Colonel Aldridge, with respect, you reformed. You went soft. And maybe that works in civilian rehabilitation programs, but this is a military combat training facility. Out here, we can't afford soft. And if Lieutenant Brennan can't establish control in a controlled environment, she has no business telling me how to train dogs for an environment where control is the difference between life and death. Controlled? Garrett's voice went hard. You've starved these animals for days. You've isolated them. You've conditioned them to associate humans with pain. There's nothing controlled about this except your certainty that she'll fail. Then she shouldn't have made the deal. Kira put her hand on Garrett's shoulder. It's okay. I knew what I was agreeing to. She walked toward the pen entrance. Behind her, she heard Garrett's voice, quiet and strained. Kira, remember, they're not the enemy. They're victims. Treat them like victims, and they'll respond like victims. Treat them like threats, and you're dead. She nodded once, kept walking. Morrison stepped aside. The handlers holding the leads positioned the 4 dogs at the far end of the enclosure. The animals were already showing stress behaviors, pacing, panting, eyes too wide, muscles coiled tight. Kira stepped through the gate. The concrete was warm through the soles of her boots. The gate swung shut behind her, and she heard the lock slide home with a sound like finality. Through the chain link, Kessler watched her with his arms crossed. Maddox had appeared at the edge of the yard, both hands still pressed over her mouth, eyes already red. Garrett stood with his hands clenched at his sides, every line of his body screaming tension. The 4 dogs waited at the opposite end. 25 feet of concrete between them. 25 feet that was about to become 0 very quickly. Kira looked at each dog in turn, read the weight distribution, the ear position, what the eyes were doing, and what the body was about to do before the body knew it yet. Lead Malinois, 75% weight forward, ears flat, pupils fully dilated, pure hunt mode, most dangerous because most committed. Older Malinois, flanking left, ears forward, not pinned, testing, not fully committed, would follow the lead dog's decision, but might break off if given reason. Young Malinois, chaotic movement, no clear weight distribution, panic energy, unpredictable, could lunge or retreat based on split-second stimulus changes. Havoc, holding back. Injured shoulder making standing difficult. Weight shifted off right side. Eyes locked on Kira with an intensity that wasn't aggression. It was assessment, waiting to see what kind of human she was going to be. Kira took one breath. Box breathing. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Heart rate, 56 beats per minute, steady as training. Cortisol levels, dropping. Chemical signature, shifting from threat to neutral. She looked at Kessler one last time. "When this is over, you're done." His smile widened. "We'll see about that." He raised his voice. "Release them." The leads dropped. 4 dogs, 90 pounds each, moving the way pack hunters move when they haven't eaten in 2 days, and everything in their body is screaming to end the thing in front of them. Kira didn't move. The lead Malinois came forward in a low stalk, shoulders bunched, teeth already showing. She'd seen that posture 100 times in training, in the field, in situations where the wrong reaction wasn't just a mistake, but a funeral. The other 3 spread wide. Instinctive triangulation, covering her flanks, cutting off any angle she might run. They'd been trained to do exactly this. The tragedy was how well they'd learned it. Havoc held back. His injured shoulder kept him slightly behind the others. Weight shifted, watching her the way he'd watched her through the run gate. Still deciding. The lead dog stopped 8 feet out. His growl was continuous, low, vibrating in the chest cavity, testing, measuring, waiting to see if she'd flinch. She didn't flinch. She kept her hands loose at her sides. No fists, no tension in the shoulders. Her breathing stayed even and slow because the dogs could hear it, could smell the cortisol or the absence of it. And right now, the absence of it was the only weapon she had. "Come on," Kessler called from outside the fence. "Show us those compliance credentials." Kira didn't look at him. She kept her focus soft, peripheral, taking in all 4 animals without locking eyes with any of them. Direct eye contact was a challenge. She wasn't here to challenge. She was here to say something else entirely. She shifted her weight, barely visible, turning her body 15 degrees to keep the flanking dog in her awareness. The older Malinois stopped circling. His head tilted. Confusion. That was good. Confusion meant the script had changed. The young dog with the yellow tag broke first. He lunged forward with a sharp bark. Close. Testing. Not committing. Kira exhaled slowly through her nose and held her ground. The dog skittered sideways, startled by his own reaction, by the fact that she hadn't done what prey was supposed to do. "Why isn't she moving?" Morrison muttered outside the fence. "She's frozen," Kessler said. "Give it 30 seconds. But she wasn't frozen. She was reading. The lead dog's weight distribution said he wasn't fully committed yet. The older one's ears were forward, but not pinned flat. Curiosity, not pure aggression. The young one was running on panic, which made him unpredictable, but also manageable if she didn't spike his fear response any higher than it already was. And Havoc. Havoc was still watching her from the back, still deciding. Kira knelt, slow, controlled, one knee to the concrete. She heard Morrison make a sound outside the fence, heard Maddox pull in a breath. She placed her hands palm down on her thighs and turned her head slightly to the right, exposing the side of her neck. Everything in military handler training said you never did that. You stood tall. You projected authority. You made yourself bigger. She made herself smaller. And something shifted. The lead dog's growl faltered. He took one step forward, then another. His nose was working overtime, processing what his training was telling him couldn't be right. There was no fear in her scent, no adrenaline dump, no cortisol spike, nothing that told him this was prey, just steady breathing and open hands in a posture that spoke a language older than any command he'd ever been taught. "She's submitting," someone said outside the fence. They're going to take her throat, but that wasn't what was happening. The lead dog approached until his muzzle was 18 inches from her face. Hot breath, fast and shallow. Kira stayed perfectly still. Let him process. Let him decide on his own terms, because anything she forced right now would cost her everything. 3 seconds. 5. 10. The dog sat. The sound Kessler made wasn't a word. It was the sound of a man watching his certainty fall out from under him. Kira kept her focus forward. The older Malinois moved next, circling wide before coming in from her left. He sniffed her shoulder, her arm, the back of her hand, processing. Then he settled beside the first dog, lowering himself to the concrete with the careful deliberateness of an animal that had just decided the threat he'd been expecting wasn't materializing. The young one with the yellow tag paced for another moment. His energy had nowhere to go, no prey flight to chase, no threat to engage. Just a human being kneeling in the center of a pen, breathing steadily, hands open, presenting no challenge and no fear. His own exhaustion beat out his conditioning. He dropped into a crouch 3 feet away, watching her with something that was almost relief. Like he'd been waiting for someone to tell him he didn't have to be aggressive anymore, and she'd just given him permission without saying a word. 3 down. Havoc. The German shepherd moved forward slowly, favoring his right side. Kira could see the effort it cost him to close the distance. He stopped 6 feet out. His eyes were locked on her face with an intensity that felt less like threat assessment and more like a question. She looked back at him. Not a challenge, a conversation. Then she did the thing that would have gotten her killed if she'd read him wrong. She closed her eyes. Total vulnerability. Every instinct in the yard screamed against it. But dogs processed visual cues as threat signals. And no eye contact combined with closed eyes was a signal so far outside the attack script that it created something like a circuit break. She heard his claws on the concrete. Closer. She felt the warmth of him before she felt anything else. The careful dampness of his nose touching her cheekbone. Then nothing. She opened her eyes. Hoppick sat 2 feet in front of her, head low, ears relaxed backward, his whole body carrying the exhausted posture of an animal that had been braced for impact so long he'd forgotten what the absence of it felt like. His tail moved once, a single, slow sweep, then stopped like he was waiting for the punishment that usually followed. Kira's throat tightened. She'd seen that before, that precise hesitation. Animals that had learned joy was something that got corrected out of them. "Come here," she said quietly. Her voice, the first sound she'd made since entering the enclosure, moved through the yard like something physical. Havoc's ears came forward. She extended her hands slowly, palm down, fingers loose. He pressed his nose into her palm and kept it there. The compound went completely silent. No wind, no voices. Just 4 dogs sitting calm around a woman who hadn't been supposed to survive the last 3 minutes, and a lieutenant colonel on the other side of the fence who looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Kira stood slowly. All 4 dogs rose with her, settling around her in a loose formation. She walked to the gate and looked through the chain link at Kessler. "Open it." He didn't move. "How did you—" His voice cracked, started again. "How?" "Open the gate." Kessler's hands were shaking when he reached for the key. The lock clicked. The gate swung open. Kira stepped through. The 4 dogs followed her out like she'd been their handler for years. Maddox had both hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming openly down her face. Morrison had backed up 3 steps without noticing. The second handler had disappeared entirely. Kessler stared at the dogs, at Kira, at the empty enclosure behind her. "That's not possible," he said. "You can't. Can't what?" Kira's voice came out quiet, clean. "Can't demonstrate that dogs respond to communication instead of abuse? Can't show that what you've been calling training is actually controlled trauma?" She looked at Havoc, who had moved to stand directly beside her left leg, close enough that his flank pressed against her knee. "The only thing wrong with these animals is you." Kessler's face flushed dark. "You got lucky. They were off today. Something was wrong with their conditioning. The only thing wrong with their conditioning is that it's yours." Kira took one step closer to him. "I've never seen them before today, but I've worked military K9 for 5 years in places that would make this training yard look like a county fair. And what I learned is that violence doesn't build loyalty, it builds compliance. And compliance fails the second the environment gets hard enough." She pulled out her phone. "How many of your deployed dogs have redirected aggression toward handlers in the field? How many have failed recall under live fire? How many have been euthanized for behavioral issues that started right here in this yard because you called it discipline when it was cruelty?" Kessler's eyes went flat. "I have every right to run this program the way I see fit. I've been doing this for 12 years. You've been running this facility for 12 years. That's different." Kira's voice stayed level. "Who do you think you are?" The question hung there in the air between them. She could feel Maddox watching her, could feel Morrison watching her, could feel the moment sitting right on its edge, ready to go one of two ways. She'd wanted more time, wanted another 48 hours to build the full evidentiary chain before she revealed everything. But Kessler wasn't going to give her 48 hours, and 4 dogs were standing behind her with injuries that couldn't wait on her timeline. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her credentials. Not the DOD contractor badge she'd handed the gate guard that morning, the real ones. "My name is Lieutenant Kira Brennan," she said clearly. "Naval Special Warfare Command, K9 Innovation Division, Federal Investigator operating under direct authorization from NCIS. Service number 774, Alpha Bravo 2. She held the credentials up so Morrison and Maddox could both see them. "I'm not a compliance auditor. I've been an authorized federal investigator since Tuesday morning. Pre-planted surveillance in your office, your computer, your communication systems. Every email you sent, every file you touched, every conversation you had inside that admin building where your own security cameras picked up audio, I have copies of all of it." The silence that followed was absolute. Maddox made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Morrison's eyes went wide enough that she could see white around the irises. Kessler looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. "You're lying," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "I'm not." Kira pocketed the credentials. "I'm here because NCIS received 7 signed complaints from handlers at this facility over the past 14 months. Anonymous. Because the people filing them were afraid of exactly what you'd do to their careers if they put their names on it." She paused. "I'm here because 2 dogs from your program died in Bahrain in the last 8 months from conditions that your own veterinarian flagged as preventable and was overruled on both times by you personally." Another pause. "And I'm here because when Naval Special Warfare sends someone like me, it means the time for paperwork is over." Kessler stood completely still. "Corporal Maddox," Kira said without looking away from him, "get Havoc to Dr. Reed right now. That shoulder needs imaging today. If anyone tries to stop you, you tell them I gave you a direct order. You understand me?" Maddox's voice came back strong and clear. "Yes, ma'am." "Wait," Kessler started. "You wait." Kira's voice went hard. "You stand right there. You don't move. You don't make a call. You don't touch a single file or a single device in your office until I tell you otherwise." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd had memorized since Tuesday. It rang twice. "Frost, it's Brennan. I need you at Camp Harrison K9 compound now. Full team. Bring the veterinary assessment unit and tell them to be ready for 4 dogs in immediate need of medical evaluation." A pause on the other end. "Yes, it's time." She hung up. Kessler's jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. "You think you can walk in here and destroy everything I've built?" "You built it on broken dogs and buried reports," Kira said. I didn't destroy anything. You did. Havoc pressed harder against her leg, and for the first time since she'd driven through those gates that morning, Kira let herself feel the full weight of what the next few hours were going to cost Kessler, and exactly how little she felt about it. Somewhere across the compound, vehicles rolled through the gate, then another, then three more. Commander Diana Frost moved like someone who had done this before and hadn't enjoyed it any of the times. Mid-40s, silver streak hair cut close, eyes that cataloged everything in the yard within the first 15 seconds of stepping out of the lead vehicle. She took in Kessler standing rigid near the fence, Morrison off to the side with his hands clasped behind his head, without anyone telling him to do it. Maddox gone with Havoc toward the clinic, and Kira in the middle of it all, with three dogs settled around her feet like she'd had them since birth. Frost pulled on latex gloves without breaking stride. "Tell me you got it all." "Everything from the first hour," Kira said. "Remote upload to your server at 0100 last night." Kessler's head snapped toward her. "Last night? I set up the remote access Tuesday morning," Kira said. "Before I walked through your gate." She looked at him directly. "Every email you sent, every file you touched, every conversation you had inside that admin building where your own security cameras picked up audio, I have copies of all of it." The color left Kessler's face in a way that happened fast and didn't come back. Frost was already moving toward the admin building with two NCIS agents flanking her. She paused at the door and looked back at Kira. "The veterinarian, you said he was overruled twice on medical flags?" "Dr. Marcus Reed. He's been documenting everything and getting buried for 14 months. He'll cooperate." "Then let's give him a reason to." Frost went inside. Kessler took one step forward. "You can't just go through my files without a warrant. You can't just walk into a federal facility and—" "The warrant's been active since dawn," Kira said, "and this is a federal facility. My federal facility now." She turned away from him. And that was somehow worse than anything else she'd said. Morrison watched Kessler's face go through the full sequence. Shock, then calculation, then something that looked briefly like he might try to run. "Sir," Morrison said quietly, "don't." Kessler looked at him like he'd forgotten Morrison was there. "You knew," Kessler said. The word came out strange, hollowed out. "You knew something was off about her, and you didn't tell me." "I told you something was off about the program," Morrison said. 6 months ago. You told me I was soft." Kessler opened his mouth, closed it. A third vehicle came through the gate, military police. 2 vehicles moving with the particular efficiency of people who'd been pre-staged and waiting for a radio call. They spread through the compound with quiet authority of a process that had already been decided. Heel block, watching, some pale, some relieved, some just standing very still with the expression of people trying to calculate what they'd done and what it was going to cost them. Garrett approached Kira quietly. The old colonel's face carried something she'd never seen there before. Not quite pride, something deeper. Relief, maybe. Relief that came from watching someone succeed at the thing you'd failed at for 40 years. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Kira corrected. "Your methods, your protocols. I just proved they work." "No," Garrett shook his head. "I give you theory, you give it practice. There's a difference." He looked at the 3 dogs still settled around her feet. "They trusted you because you earned it in 3 minutes. That's not something you can teach. That's something you either have or you don't." Inside the admin building, Frost had Kessler's office open. An agent was working through the desktop computer while another photographed the room. A cardboard box sat on the desk, already half full. Frost met Kira at the door. "We found something," she said. Her voice had gone carefully neutral. "Something you need to see." She led Kira to the computer, pulled up a file directory labeled Asset Management Archived. 8 folders, each one with a dog's name and a date range. Frost opened the first one. Transfer documentation. Medical assessments marked behavioral unsuitability. Euthanization recommended. And beneath that, secondary files, emails, correspondence with civilian contractors, purchase agreements. Kira felt something go cold in her chest. He wasn't just euthanizing them, Frost said quietly. He was selling them to private military contractors, security firms, one wealthy private buyer in Georgia. Government property, fully trained military working dogs, sold for personal profit. She pulled up the financial records. 8 transactions, amounts ranging from $42,000 to $91,000 each. And the dogs that were too damaged to sell? Kira asked, already knowing the answer. Frost didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Kira closed her eyes. Opened them. Where is he? MP vehicle. He asked for legal counsel. Frost looked at her. He also asked to speak with you directly, alone. The NCIS agent at the computer turned around. Ma'am, absolutely not. He's already demonstrated physical intimidation toward you twice today. If he... I'll do it, Kira said. Lieutenant, he wants to feel like he's still negotiating from a position of strength. If he thinks he's working me, he'll give me more than he'd give anyone else. Kira picked up the folder with the financial records. Keep monitoring. If anything changes in there, you'll hear it. She walked out before anyone could stop her. Kessler was in the back of the first MP vehicle, hands not cuffed yet because he wasn't under arrest yet, just being held pending the completion of the initial evidence sweep. He looked smaller than he had in the yard. Not physically. Something else had gone out of him. Kira got in the other side and pulled the door shut behind her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. You're younger than I thought you were, Kessler said finally. He wasn't being cruel. He sounded almost confused. When I first saw you, I figured you for mid-20s, pushing it. I'm 27. He laughed once, no humor in it. 27. I've got boots older than you. You've got violations older than me too. Doesn't make them any less real. Kessler looked out the window at the compound where his program was being systematically processed into evidence. I built this facility from nothing, he said. When I took command, it was underfunded, understaffed, running a 40% washout rate on dogs that cost the government $80,000 each to source and train. 3 years later, we were the top producing K9 unit in SOCOM. That's not nothing. No, Kira said. It's not. It's just built on the wrong foundation. You don't know what it takes to keep a program like this alive. The budget cuts, the reviews. Every year they want more output with less money, and they don't care how you get it. His voice went tighter. So you find ways. You make hard calls. You do what you have to do. You tortured animals for profit. The words landed flat and final. Kessler's hands tightened in his lap. Here's what's going to happen, Kira said. You're going to give Commander Frost full access to everything. The financial accounts, the contractor correspondence, every name involved in the transport and sale of those dogs. And you're going to cooperate fully, on record, because the alternative is we take the 6 months it costs us to build the case ourselves. And when it goes to court-martial, every handler you ever pressured into silence testifies in public. She let that settle. Military doesn't look kindly at men who sell the animals that save soldiers' lives. You know that. Kessler pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. Heavy silence opened up between them. Finally, Kessler spoke. The dogs I sold, will they come back? We'll find as many as we can. Some of them are probably... We'll find as many as we can, Kira said again. That's what I can promise. Kessler nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone with hands that weren't steady. My personal email. There's a folder called Equipment Logistics. Everything's in there. The contractors, the amounts, the dates. He unlocked the phone. Password is Camp Harrison 11. Capital C, capital H. He held it out to her. Kira took it. Who else knew about the sales? She asked. Morrison handled the transport documentation. Nobody else. I kept it separate. He stopped. I didn't want anyone else caught up in it. That's the first decent thing you've said today. Kessler's jaw tightened. I know what I did. I know what it was. He looked out the window toward the kennel block. I stopped seeing them as animals about 2 years in. Started seeing them as metrics, numbers in a column that had to stay green. His voice dropped to something barely above a murmur. I don't know exactly when that happened. I wish I did. Kira looked at him for a moment. Havoc, she said. The shepherd in Run 9. The one your staff wanted to euthanize last month. Kessler was quiet. He pressed his nose into my palm, Kira said. After everything that had been done to him in this yard, he still tried. They all did. She opened the vehicle door. Remember that the next time you tell yourself the metrics were the only thing that mattered. She got out and walked back toward the admin building, where Frost was waiting. She was halfway across the yard when Maddox came running from the direction of the clinic, breathing hard, her face doing something complicated that Kira couldn't read from a distance. Good, complicated, or bad, she couldn't tell yet. She was about to find out. Ma'am, Maddox called out, closing the distance between them fast. It's Havoc. Dr. Reed just finished the imaging. Kira stopped walking. And? Maddox pressed her lips together. The younger woman's eyes were red, but her voice stayed steady. The shoulder's worse than we thought. A lot worse. She exhaled. He said you need to come now. He said there's something else in those images that you need to see yourself. Dr. Marcus Reed was a man who chose his words carefully. Kira had figured that out within the first 30 seconds of meeting him the previous afternoon, when he'd given her 3 sentences about the facility's medical protocols and then stopped talking, waiting to see if she actually understood what the 3 sentences meant. She understood. He'd respected that and said 12 more. So when Maddox said he needed her to see something herself, Kira moved fast. The clinic was quiet except for the low hum of equipment and the sound of Havoc breathing. He was on a padded examination table, sedated lightly for the imaging, his tan and black coat rising and falling in a slow rhythm that was the most peaceful thing Kira had seen all day. Reed stood at the imaging display with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been holding something in for a long time and had finally run out of room to hold it. How bad? Kira asked. The shoulder is manageable. Surgery, 6 weeks recovery, physical therapy. He'll have a slight hitch in his stride permanently, but he'll walk fine. He'll run. Reed paused. That's not what I needed you to see. He pulled up a second image on the display. Full skeletal scan, standard protocol. These are stress fractures, he said, pointing. Front left radius, healed wrong. Old injury at least 18 months, never treated. He moved to the next image. This is a partially healed rib fracture. Same age estimate, same conclusion, never treated. Another image. These are burn scars along the nerve pathways in his left rear leg, consistent with repeated electrical stimulation at high voltage. Voltage that causes tissue damage if applied more than 3 or 4 times. He stopped, met Kira's eyes. We found 11 distinct scar sites. The room was completely silent. He's been living with all of this, Kira said, not a question. Every day, every training session, every time someone put a lead on him and expected him to perform. Reed's voice was even and controlled in the way that meant it was costing him something to keep it that way. He wasn't uncontrollable, Lieutenant. He wasn't a failed asset. He was in chronic pain, and he was still trying to do his job. He looked at Havoc on the table, and when the pain made him flinch at the wrong moment, they called it a behavioral defect and escalated the correction. Reed pulled a digital recorder from the counter. I flagged this dog for full medical evaluation 8 months ago. Kessler denied it. I filed a formal written recommendation. It was overruled in writing within 24 hours. His jaw tightened. I should have gone over his head the same day. I didn't. That's on me. You're going on the record about all of it, Kira said. I already started. He set the recorder down. I've been recording since Maddox called me. Every flag I submitted, every override, Every dog I recommended for medical retirement that got sent back into rotation. All of it. He gestured to a filing cabinet in the corner. There are 14 other cases like Havoc in my files. Different dogs, same pattern. Kira looked at Havoc for a long moment. The slow breathing, the complete trusting stillness of an animal that had finally been allowed to stop bracing. He's going to be okay, she said, more to herself than to Reed. How much faster? She said the financial trail connects to two of the private contractors directly. Wire transfers, receipts, everything documented. She thinks they can move to formal charges by tomorrow morning instead of end of week. Kira felt something release in her chest. Not satisfaction, not quite. Something quieter. The specific feeling of a door closing on something that should have been closed a long time ago. She touched Havoc's head once, gently, and walked out. The next 72 hours moved with the particular momentum of an investigation that had been building pressure for months and finally found release. Commander Frost's team processed Camp Harrison like archaeologists excavating a crime scene, documenting everything with the methodical care of people who knew this case would be studied in military law classes for the next decade. Kessler cooperated fully, handed over passwords, financial records, contractor contact lists, sat for 8 hours of recorded testimony that laid out exactly how a decorated officer had convinced himself that selling government property was acceptable if the money-funded equipment the official budget wouldn't cover. The math didn't support his story. The personal bank accounts did. Morrison, the staff sergeant who'd handled transport documentation, made a deal within 6 hours. Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided emails, text messages, shipping manifests, everything that connected Kessler's operation to a network of private contractors who'd been buying trained military working dogs at a fraction of their actual value. 2 of those contractors were already flagged by the Department of Defense for separate procurement violations. This connected them to a pattern. It made the case bigger than Kessler, bigger than Camp Harrison, and it pointed directly at Colonel Nathan Pierce, Regional K9 Command, whose signature appeared on approval documents that had allowed Kessler to reclassify dogs as retired without completing standard adoption processing. Whether Pierce knew what he was approving or was just rubber-stamping paperwork, that was what the next phase of the investigation would determine. Frost briefed Kira on the morning of the 3rd day. They sat in a borrowed office at Camp Harrison's main administration building, surrounded by file boxes and exhaustion that came from sustained operational tempo. Pierce is being brought in for questioning this afternoon, Frost said. His legal team is already making noise, which tells us exactly how worried they are. This is going to get loud before it gets quiet. Let it get loud, Kira said. The story's going to break. Media is already picking up the base activity. By tomorrow afternoon, you'll have cameras at the gate. Then tomorrow afternoon, I'll have something worth showing them. Frost studied her for a moment. You know this isn't over when we leave today. Investigation into Pierce's network could take months. You'll likely be called as a primary witness in proceedings that could drag on for the better part of a year. Testimony, depositions, the full process. She paused. Naval Special Warfare needs to know if you're prepared to see this through the entire distance. Kira thought about Havoc on that examination table, about 14 case files in Reed's office, about the 8 dogs that had been sold, and the unknown number that had been quietly removed from the program when they became inconvenient instead of profitable. Tell them yes, she said. Frost nodded once, satisfied. There's something else. Corporal Maddox filed an official complaint against Kessler 6 months ago through base channels. It was buried by the same colonel whose signature is on the transfer documents. She submitted a second complaint 3 months ago, also buried. Frost's expression was controlled and cold. She's been fighting this alone for over half a year. I know, Kira said. She's the reason this moved as fast as it did. She's going to need protection during the investigation. Formal witness status. Reassignment if necessary. Give her whatever she needs, Frost said, and when this is done, she belongs in a program that actually deserves her. Noted as an official recommendation, Frost closed her folder. Kessler's being formally arrested in approximately 20 minutes. You don't have to be present for that. I know, Kira said. I'm going to be with the dogs. She found Maddox in the recovery area with the 3 Malinois, who had been placed in clean runs, with fresh bedding and full water and food, that they approached with the particular caution of animals that had learned abundance was temporary. Maddox was sitting on the floor outside the middle run, not talking, just present, letting the dogs get used to the idea that a human being could sit near them without wanting anything. The young one, the dog that had been on ISO with the yellow tag, had his nose pressed against the gate, not growling, just watching Maddox with the tentative attention of an animal trying to decide if trust was a thing that was still available to him. He's been like that for 20 minutes, Maddox said without looking up when she heard Kira's footsteps. Just watching me. That's a good sign, Kira said. Doesn't feel like enough. Kira sat down on the floor beside her, which required more conscious effort than she wanted to admit after the 72 hours it had been. It's exactly enough. It's everything, actually. She watched the young Malinois push his nose a quarter-inch further through the gate. An animal that's been through what he's been through, choosing to watch instead of retreat, that's not a small thing. Maddox was quiet for a moment. What happens to them? The 3 out here in Havoc. Havoc goes through full surgical recovery. After that, I'm working on placing him with a veterans service organization in Virginia that does trauma-informed partnerships. They match dogs that have been through rehabilitation with veterans dealing with PTSD. The dogs heal together. Kira watched the young Malinois. The other 3 will go to a specialized rehabilitation facility in Colorado. Good people, patient handlers. They'll take the time these dogs need. And the 8 that were sold? We've already started tracking them. 2 were placed with a security contractor in Virginia. NCIS is making contact with the company tonight. 3 more with a private firm in Texas. The overseas transfer is going to take longer, but we'll get there. Kira looked at her directly. We find them all, however long it takes. Maddox pressed her lips together, nodded. And me? She asked. Her voice stayed level, but the question underneath it wasn't level at all. It was the question of someone who had spent months fighting alone and still didn't fully believe that fighting alone was over. You're a formal federal witness as of tonight. You're protected for the duration of the investigation. Kira paused. And when this is done, I'm recommending you for a position with the Naval Special Warfare K9 Oversight Division. We're building a new one from the ground up. People who've seen what goes wrong from the inside and actually give a damn about fixing it. I need people like you in it. Maddox stared at her. I'm a corporal. I'm 24 years old. I'm a lieutenant. I'm 27, and I just took down an 11-year operation by kneeling in front of a German Shepherd. Kira let that land for a second. Age is not the relevant qualification here. Maddox laughed. It came out a little broken and completely genuine. The first real laugh Kira had heard from her all week. The young Malinois pulled his nose back from the gate. Then slowly, with the deliberateness of an animal making a considered decision, he lay down facing Maddox, chin on his paws, eyes soft. Maddox made a sound that wasn't quite words. Yeah, Kira said quietly. That's what it looks like. 30 minutes later, Kessler was walked out of the admin building in handcuffs with a military police officer on each side. He didn't look toward the kennel block. He didn't look anywhere except the ground in front of him. The handlers who were still in the compound watched him go without a word. Some of them with relief visible enough to see from across the yard. Some of them knowing that the investigation wasn't done and that their own choices were still going to have to be accounted for. Kira watched him get into the vehicle from where she stood near the clinic door. Felt nothing dramatic about it, just the particular quiet that settled when something that had been wrong for a long time finally stopped. Her phone buzzed. Frost. The colonel at Regional Command is being brought in for questioning tomorrow morning, Frost said. His legal team is already making noise, which tells us exactly how worried they are. This is going to get loud before it gets quiet. Let it get loud. She hung up and went back inside to Havoc. He was awake. The sedation had worn off enough that he was tracking sound and movement, his head slightly raised, his dark eyes finding her the moment she came through the door. His tail moved once against the padded table. That same careful wag. The one he kept stopping like he expected to be corrected for it. Nobody's going to stop that, Kira said. Not anymore. She sat beside him and rested her hand on his flank and felt him exhale long and slow. The deep release of an animal that had finally, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, decided that the person beside him was safe. 4 months later, the Military Working Dog Welfare and Accountability Act was signed into law in a ceremony that drew more media attention than anyone had expected. Mandatory independent oversight, quarterly veterinary audits with no chain of command interference, anonymous reporting systems for handlers, criminal liability for supervisors who buried documented abuse, real accountability, written into federal law, enforceable, permanent. The recovery operation for the 8 sold dogs had moved faster than Frost had projected. The 2 Virginia dogs were recovered the first week, thin, reactive, but alive. Alive meant there was still time. The 3 in Texas came back the second week. One of them, a Malinois named Ghost, was near feral from isolation and neglect. Took doctor. Read 4 hours to sedate him safely. All 3 were transported to the Colorado Rehabilitation Facility that specialized in trauma recovery. The overseas transfer took 11 weeks to trace, but they found the dog, a 4-year-old Malinois who'd been sold to a private compound owner in the Republic of Georgia. The combined pressure of 3 federal agencies and 2 international agreements brought him home. Colonel Nathan Pierce resigned under pressure before the case reached court-martial. The investigation into his network was still ongoing, but the evidence was strong enough that his legal team had advised him to step down rather than face public trial. Kessler pleaded guilty to 7 of 12 charges and was sentenced at a proceeding that received national coverage. 8 years at Leavenworth, dishonorable discharge, pension forfeited. Morrison received 3 years under a cooperation agreement. And the dogs, the 47 dogs across 6 facilities who had been euthanized under Pierce's Operation Hard Standard, were memorialized in the legislation. Their names read aloud during the signing ceremony. A permanent record of what the old methods had cost. Kira stood beside Commander Frost at the signing ceremony, wearing her service dress blues, watching the president put pen to paper on legislation that would reshape how the United States military trained and protected its working dogs. Maddox stood on her other side, newly promoted to sergeant, already leading the first training cohort of the Naval Special Warfare K9 Oversight Division. Garrett Aldridge sat in the front row, invited as the civilian consultant whose protocols had formed the foundation of the new legislation. He looked smaller than he had 4 months ago, frailer. The early-stage Parkinson's diagnosis had come 6 weeks after Camp Harrison, and the progression was faster than anyone had hoped. But he was here, and that mattered. After the ceremony, Kira found him outside on the steps of the Capitol building, looking out at the city with the expression of a man who'd finally accomplished something he'd been working toward for 40 years. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Garrett corrected. His voice had the tremor in it now, the slight shake that came with the disease. But the certainty was still steel. "You proved the methods work. I just provided the framework." The framework was everything. He turned to look at her. "No, the courage to walk into that pen was everything. The framework just gave you a language to speak. You're the one who spoke it." They stood in silence for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you," Garrett said. "The diagnosis, it's progressing faster than expected. The neurologist is giving me maybe 2 years of functional independence. After that," he didn't finish the sentence. Kira felt something tighten in her chest. Garrett, I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Old, worn, a journal carried through years of hard use. My training logs, 75 to 85. Every mistake I made, every dog I lost, every handler I trained wrong. He held it out to her. I want you to have this. I can't, you can, and you will. His voice was firm. Because when I'm gone, someone needs to remember what not to do. Someone needs to teach the next generation why the old ways failed. That's my legacy, Kira. Not the reforms, not the protocols, the mistakes, the failures, the 12 dogs that died because I thought I knew better. He pressed the journal into her hands. You make the new legacy. I'll be the cautionary tale. Kira took the journal, felt the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, the weight of 40 years of guilt and hard-won wisdom, and a man who'd spent the last third of his life trying to undo the damage of the first two-thirds. I'll make sure they know, she said. I'll make sure every handler who goes through the new program understands where we came from and why we can never go back. Garrett nodded, satisfied. That's all I needed to hear. Havoc had his surgery 6 days after Kessler's arrest. The procedure took 4 hours. There were complications. The nerve damage was more extensive than the imaging had shown. But Dr. Reed was patient and skilled and determined that this dog, at least, was going to walk out of his operating room whole. Havoc recovered at the Colorado Rehabilitation Facility for 9 weeks before being matched. The facility specialized in trauma-informed matching, pairing not just dogs with veterans, but wounds with understanding. When the coordinator reviewed Havoc's case file alongside the intake assessment for a retired Army Ranger named Elijah Cross, she saw what the data couldn't show. 2 souls who'd learned the same hard lessons about trust. Elijah Cross, 38 years old, lost his right leg below the knee to an IED in Afghanistan in 2019. Severe PTSD, survivor's guilt from losing 3 squad members in the same blast. His therapist had recommended a service dog. Elijah had resisted for 2 years. The matching coordinator showed him Havoc's file, showed him the medical scans, told him this was a dog that had been through hell and come out the other side still trying to trust. Elijah agreed to meet him. The first meeting happened in a quiet room at the rehabilitation center. Elijah in his wheelchair, both hands gripping the armrests like he was bracing for impact. Havoc brought in on a loose lead by one of the facility handlers. The dog saw Elijah, stopped. The handler released the lead. Havoc approached slowly, limping slightly from the shoulder that would never be quite right. He reached Elijah's chair, looked up at the man with those dark, steady eyes that had seen too much, and decided to keep trying anyway. Then Havoc laid his head on Elijah's remaining knee. Elijah broke. First tears in 5 years came from somewhere deep and unfamiliar. They meant something was shifting that hadn't shifted since the IED had taken his leg, and his squad, and his certainty that the world was a place where good things happen to people who tried their best. Havoc didn't move, just stayed there, present, solid. 100 pounds of living proof that broken things could heal if given the right conditions. The handler stepped back quietly, let the moment happen. After a while, Elijah reached down, scratched behind Havoc's ears. The dog's tail wagged. Didn't stop this time, just kept going in a slow, steady rhythm that said joy was allowed again. Okay, Elijah whispered. Okay, boy, let's try this. 6 months later, Elijah sent Kira a photograph without any message attached. Just a picture. Elijah on a trail somewhere in Colorado, running with a prosthetic blade, Havoc beside him, tongue out, ears forward, moving with that slight hitch in his stride that would always be there, but didn't slow him down anymore. Both of them running, both of them whole in ways they hadn't been before. Kira saved the photo, looked at it for a long time, thought about what Maddox had asked 6 months ago, sitting on the floor of the kennel block, if any of it was going to be enough. This was what enough looked like. Not perfect, not finished, not without cost or scar, or the long, slow work of healing that didn't follow anyone's timeline, but real, documented, written into law, carried forward by people who had chosen to fight for it when it would have been easier to look away. Kira's promotion to lieutenant commander came through 8 months after Camp Harrison. 28 years old, youngest person ever to hold that rank in the Naval Special Warfare K9 Division. Her first official act was to authorize the opening of the Colonel Garrett Aldridge Center for K9 Behavioral Science at Fort Benning, Georgia. The facility where Garrett had given his lectures in the early 90s, where he taught the methods that had eventually killed Captain Thaddeus Brennan and hundreds of dogs across 3 decades of misapplied conviction. Now it would be the place where those methods were studied as history, as cautionary tale, as the foundation that had to be dismantled before something better could be built. The opening ceremony happened on a cold February morning, exactly 34 years after Captain Brennan had died in Kuwait. Kira had chosen the date deliberately. Garrett attended in a wheelchair now. The Parkinson's had progressed faster than anyone had hoped. His hands shook constantly. His voice had the tremor that made speaking for long periods difficult. But he was there, and he was lucid. And when Kira asked him to say a few words to the assembled handlers, 200 of them, ages 18 to 45, representing the future of military working dog operations, he stood with effort and spoke with the clarity of someone who knew his time was limited and refused to waste it. "I'm 73 years old," he said. His voice carried despite the shake in it. "I spent 10 years training dogs wrong. I spent the next 40 years trying to fix it. The math doesn't work in my favor. I broke more than I fixed." He paused, looked out at the faces watching him. "But Lieutenant Commander Brennan," he gestured to Kira, standing at attention beside the podium. "She's 28. She's got 50 years ahead of her if she's lucky, maybe 60. And every dog that goes through this facility, every handler who learns the right methods instead of my wrong ones, that's compound interest on the work she started at Camp Harrison." Another pause. "I'm not here to be honored. I'm here to be a warning, a reminder that conviction without evidence is just stubbornness, that tradition without evaluation is just repeated failure, that the methods your grandfather used might have been the best available in his time, but they're not the best available now." He sat down heavily. The applause that followed was respectful but subdued. This wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. After the ceremony, Kira found Garrett outside the facility, looking at the building that bore his name. The sign above the entrance read, "Colonel Garrett Aldridge Center for K9 Behavioral Science. Established 2025. Learn from the past, build the future." "You hate that sign," Kira said, not a question. "I hate that my name is on a building that exists because I failed for 10 years. Garrett's voice was quiet. "But I understand why it needs to be there. People need to know the reforms didn't come from theoretical study. They came from blood and failure and 40 years of penance." "It's not penance anymore," Kira said. "It's legacy." "Same thing, sometimes." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Garrett spoke again. "I won't see the full implementation. The neurologist is giving me maybe 18 months of cognitive function. After that, the disease takes what's left." Kira had known this was coming, had seen the progression in the tremors, the occasional word-finding difficulty, the way Garrett tired faster than he had even 3 months ago. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, in a way that medical reports didn't. "Then we make the next 18 months count," she said. "No." Garrett turned to look at her. "You make the next 50 years count. I've done my part. This is your fight now." He reached into his jacket. The movement was shaky, took longer than it should have, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to her. "My will. I'm leaving you everything. The Montana property, the rescue dogs, the research files, the training logs, all of it. Use the property as a rehabilitation site if you want. Use the files to teach. Use whatever you need to make sure this work continues after I'm gone. Garrett, no arguments. It's already filed with my attorney. You're the executor. You're the legacy. His voice was firm, despite the tremor. I spent 40 years carrying guilt. I don't want you to carry it when I'm gone. I want you to carry the work. There's a difference. Kira took the paper, unfolded it, read the first few lines. Everything left to Lieutenant Commander Kira Brennan to be used in furtherance of military working dog welfare and rehabilitation. She looked up at him. This man who'd spent 10 years breaking things and 40 years fixing them, who'd given her the tools to succeed where he'd failed, who'd stood beside her at Camp Harrison and proved that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a practice. I'll make sure it matters, she said. I know you will. That's why I can let go. 6 months later, Garrett Aldridge died peacefully in his sleep at his Montana ranch, surrounded by the 8 rescue dogs he'd spent the last 15 years rehabilitating. He was 73 years old. The obituary in the Army Times called him a reformer, a teacher, and a man who spent his life fixing what he'd broken. The funeral had full military honors. Handlers who'd gone through the first cohort at the Aldridge Center attended. Kira delivered the eulogy. Colonel Aldridge made mistakes, she said, standing at the podium in Arlington National Cemetery, looking out at the assembled mourners. He spent 10 years training dogs in ways that caused harm. He trained handlers who went on to cause more harm. He built a system that prioritized hardness over health, compliance over communication, tradition over evidence. She paused. And then he spent 40 years dismantling that system, brick by brick, protocol by protocol, handler by handler. He didn't make excuses. He didn't hide from the consequences. He looked at what he'd done, understood it was wrong, and dedicated the rest of his life to making it right. She looked at the casket, draped in an American flag. That's not failure, that's heroism. The willingness to admit you were wrong and spend decades proving you learned from it. The courage to stand in front of 200 young handlers and say, I broke things. Don't be like me. Here's how to do better. Her voice steadied. Garrett Aldridge taught me that it's never too late to choose the right path. That legacy isn't what you build in your prime. It's what you leave behind when you're gone. And what he left behind is a system that will save thousands of dogs and handlers over the next 50 years. She stepped back from the podium. Rest easy, Colonel. We've got it from here. 1 year after Camp Harrison, Kira stood in the training yard of the Aldridge Center, watching a young handler work with a German shepherd that had washed out of another program for being too soft. The handler was 22, female, corporal designation. She moved with the careful confidence of someone who'd been taught the right methods from the beginning and never had to unlearn the wrong ones. The dog responded to hand signals. No shock collar, no raised voice, no force, just clear communication and mutual respect. Perfect obedience built on trust instead of fear. Kira watched from the observation deck. Maddox stood beside her, holding a tablet with the training metrics for the current cohort. 94% success rate, 0 behavioral washouts, 0 stress-related injuries. They're getting it, Maddox said. The new handlers. They don't even question the methods because they've never seen the old ones work. That's the goal, Kira said. Make the right way so normal that the wrong way becomes unthinkable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elijah Cross, Havoc's handler. Just a photo. Havoc asleep on a couch, curled up with his head on Elijah's lap. Both of them peaceful. Both of them safe. The caption read, 5 months since his last nightmare. Thank you. Kira showed the photo to Maddox. That's what we're doing this for, Maddox said quietly. Yeah, Kira said. It is. She looked out at the training yard, at the handlers learning to communicate instead of dominate, at the dogs learning that humans could be trusted, at the system that had been built on the bones of 47 dead animals and one man's 40-year quest for redemption. February 27th, 2026. 35 years to the day after Captain Thaddeus Brennan died in Kuwait. Kira drove to Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego, brought flowers, brought Garrett's journal, brought the photograph of Havoc and Elijah that now sat on her desk at the Aldridge Center. She knelt at her father's grave, placed the flowers, opened the journal to the first entry. "Dad," she said quietly, "you died because someone trained a dog to be a weapon instead of a partner. I never met you, never heard your voice, never got to ask you what you would have wanted me to do with my life." She touched the headstone. "But I spent 28 years figuring it out anyway. You died for a failure in training. I've spent my career fixing that failure, making sure what killed you doesn't kill anyone else." She set Garrett's journal on the grave, left it there for a moment, a symbolic gesture. The old methods, the old failures, left with the man who died because of them. "The man who helped me fix it, Colonel Aldridge, he's buried 200 yards from you now. Arlington, Section 60. He spent 40 years trying to make amends for teaching the methods that got you killed. He succeeded. The law that bears his name is going to save thousands of dogs." She picked up the journal. It wasn't meant to stay. It was meant to be carried forward, used, studied. A reminder of what happened when certainty replaced evidence. And Havoc, the dog named after the one that killed you, he's alive. He's helping a veteran heal from war. They're healing each other. She traced her father's name carved in granite. Thaddeus Michael Brennan. She'd never known his middle name until she was 18, found it in his service record while researching the incident. Never knew he'd wanted to name his daughter Maya if it was a girl. Her mother had told her that on her 21st birthday, crying into her wine. Never knew he sang off-key in the shower, or that he'd been afraid of heights, or that he'd proposed to her mother 3 times before she said yes. 1,000 small details that made a person real instead of a photograph on a mantle. "Mom told me you used to talk to your K9 partner like he was human," Kira said. "That you believed dogs understood more than people gave them credit for." Her throat tightened. "You were right, they do. And I've spent my life proving it in a way you never got the chance to." She stood slowly, knees stiff from kneeling. "I think you'd be proud of that. I hope you would." She didn't say goodbye. You didn't say goodbye to someone you'd been talking to your whole life, through every choice you made, every dog you saved, every handler you trained. You just promised to keep the conversation going. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. But it was enough. She walked back to her car, drove to the Aldridge Center, arrived just as the afternoon training session was starting. 200 handlers, 40 dogs, all of them learning the methods that Garrett had spent 40 years developing, and Kira had spent 1 day in a concrete pen proving worked. She stood at the entrance, looked at the sign above the door, Colonel Garrett Aldridge Center for K9 Behavioral Science. Below it, a new addition, installed just last week, dedicated to the memory of Captain Thaddeus Brennan and the 47 military working dogs lost to Operation Hard Standard. May we learn from their sacrifice. Kira felt her throat tighten, steadied herself, walked inside. The main training hall had a wall dedicated to the dogs. Photographs, names, dates. The 47 who had been euthanized under Pierce's network. The visual reminder of why this work mattered. At the center of the wall, a larger photograph. Havoc, post-recovery, sitting calmly beside Elijah Cross. Both of them looking at the camera, both of them whole. Below the photograph, an inscription. "This is what victory looks like. Not perfect, not painless, but real." Kira stood in front of the wall for a long moment, thought about her father, who'd never known she existed, about Garrett, who'd spent 40 years earning the redemption he finally achieved, about Kessler, serving 8 years at Leavenworth for believing the wrong thing with absolute conviction, about Morrison, about Maddox, about Reed, about every person who'd touched this story and been changed by it, and about Havoc, the dog who'd survived, who'd learned to trust again, who'd proven that broken things could heal if given the right conditions and enough time, and someone who refused to give up on them. She turned away from the wall, walked into the training hall, took her place at the instructor's podium. "Good afternoon," she said to the assembled handlers. Her voice carried across the room with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to stand there. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Kira Brennan. Welcome to Day 1 of K9 Handler Certification. Before we begin, I want you to understand something." She gestured to the wall of photographs. "Every dog on that wall died because someone prioritized tradition over evidence. Because someone believed that hardness equaled effectiveness. Because someone convinced themselves that the ends justified the means." She paused. Those someones weren't monsters. They were professionals who believed they were doing the right thing, who had good intentions and bad methods, who caused immeasurable harm while trying to prevent it. She looked at each handler in turn. "You're here to learn better, to understand that dogs aren't tools to be sharpened. They're partners to be trained. That fear-based obedience fails under stress. That trust-based communication succeeds." She pulled up a slide. Garrett's photograph, 73 years old, standing in front of the center that bore his name, trembling hands gripping the podium, eyes still sharp. This man spent 10 years training dogs wrong, then 40 years fixing it. His methods are what you'll learn here. His mistakes are what you'll study. His legacy is what you'll carry forward. She advanced to the next slide, her father's photograph. Captain Thaddeus Brennan, 28 years old, forever. "This man died because a dog was trained wrong. I never met him, but I've spent my life making sure his death meant something." Final slide. Havoc and Elijah, healed, whole, together. This is the result. This is why we're here. Not to build weapons, to build partnerships, to train animals that save lives without losing their own souls in the process. She closed the presentation. "Welcome to the Aldridge Center. Let's get to work." The training began. And in a cemetery 200 miles north, a headstone marked the grave of a man who died 35 years ago, not knowing that his daughter would spend her life turning his death into legislation that would save thousands. In Montana, 8 rescue dogs lived on 200 acres that would soon become a rehabilitation site. In Virginia, a veteran and a German Shepherd ran together, both of them learning that wholeness wasn't the absence of scars, but the presence of someone who understood them. And in Georgia, 200 young handlers learned the methods that had taken 40 years of failure to develop, and one day in a concrete pen to prove. The legacy was built. The work continued. The dogs were safe. Kira Brennan stood at the front of the training hall and taught the next generation everything Garrett Aldridge had learned from 40 years of mistakes, and everything she had learned from one father she'd never met. It was enough. It had to be. And for the first time in her life, standing in that hall surrounded by handlers who would carry this work forward long after she was gone, Kira believed it actually was. The mission was complete. The promise was kept. Her father could rest. Garrett could rest. And she could finally breathe.